I would like to talk today to you about a topic that I think is very pivotal in regards to innovation and how we build new ventures, how we work with new solutions. And that's the concept of hypotheses and um, unknowns, if you will. I came across this quote or this sentence a couple of days ago, and because we were discussing, having plans and planning and how companies fail because they're too rigid and too much planning. And this quote came along: having a plan is great, sticking to the plan is bad, or something like that. And the core element to it is have a direction, yes, but be okay changing. And why is this changing, and the adoption of the plan, why is that so relevant? For those of you who are unfamiliar with this, there's a concept called VUCA world. It's a concept that in, I think, 1991, so 31 years old pretty much in February, the US military came up with basically what the battlefield of the future looks like or is going to look like. And they came up with 4 elements. I've augmented this a bit. So they're talking about volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So basically, the world is fast. Things are changing quickly. We're surrounded by uncertainty. Changes are very, very frequent, and we don't exactly know where things are going. It's complex, which means multiple stakeholders, multiple factors changing the entire landscape all the time, and ambiguous, which means it's not really clear what to read from this, and how to basically write forward trends and learnings that we've had in the past. I've seen this second C added to this for Corona. So Corona introduced a lot of additional chaos and change and uncertainty. For us, the core message in this is we don't know. And the only way to find out is by trying and testing things. This is very much in contrast to, and we talked about having this plan in the beginning, from the private and personal element of this. So we are used to making plans. There's the New Year's resolution. There is the, I want to get fit and I'm making a fitness plan, those kind of things, and I'm sticking to it. This is very much about forcing myself to do things repeatedly and to not get off track, not get distracted, procrastinate, those kind of things. Organizations generally don't have that kind of problem because as a structure, they're usually quite good at sticking to a plan and doing things. So their problem is more reacting to the complexity that's around it. Also, as a private person, you have a lot less complexity and a lot less external influence to deal with. The problem that we have with this is that as private people, we're used to this planning thing because it works for us on a small scale. And for us as a family or as an individual, it doesn't so well work for organizations anymore. So we kind of need to get our heads out of this mindset and be more flexible. This is the private motivation part versus the corporate goals. This does not exclude having a vision and having like a target picture, what we call a lighthouse scenario maybe. So it does absolutely make sense to have a direction which you're moving towards. That absolutely is relevant and important. It's not so important and relevant what that direction, to completely stick to that and not look left and right. So our job is to, kind of find solutions in regards to that. One concept that really comes to mind with this is also the unlearning. So organizations need to learn not to rely on past learnings, previous learnings, and things that we've done before and always done this way. Again, there's a book on this. This is one of the core elements. Now, why am I telling all this, and what does this have to do with hypotheses? This is exactly the change in mindset that we need to have in order to work with this new world, right? We need to use hypotheses and understand that we're not dealing with facts anymore. We're not trying to we're not having fixed solutions. We're not having fixed ideas. What we're having is hypotheses about what the customers like. We're having hypotheses about what the problems of the customers are like, what they're doing, what they like, those kind of things. And we need to get away from having this notion of a fixed understanding. We don't know anymore. We just have hypotheses. We have a hunch. We have an idea what it might be like. And from that arises a natural task of validate. Is it really the case? Is that really what we're dealing with? Many years ago, this is what a friend of mine told me, and it really helps me remind me in this. When you assume, you make an ass out of you and me. So let's not assume. Now, how do you start with hypotheses? When we start a new innovation project, we're trying to find out new business models or identifying a customer. There's multiple elements. So what we're trying to do is we just write down hypotheses. And hypothesis can be something like people like cheese, and I'm going to show us a couple of examples. It could be people like riding bikes. It's legal to ride bikes. People like red bikes more than yellow bikes. It could be all those kind of things. The important part in this that is twofold. One is this notion of we don't know, and this is our start point for validation moving forward. The other is that by building, or when we're building solutions, we have those kind of things in our head, and they can slow us down, or they can actually stop us from thinking beyond that. So hypotheses also, and having a space for hypotheses, or as we also call them, critical assumptions, is a way to kind of free up your brain. So a bit like Marie Kondo, things have a home. That way they can live there, and then you don't need to think about it anymore. And they don't get lost, and you can get back to it when it's time to get back to them in the process. As with a lot of things in innovation, in this case, it's about quantity. So we want a lot of hypotheses, we want a lot of ideas, we want a lot of stakeholders, those kind of things. And that helps us freeing our mind, build a lot of hypotheses. Now, this can be, like I said, this can be a list, just a piece of paper, and you just write down, what do you think your customers like, what their problem is like, what do they like, all those kind of things. It can be on a mural board, it can be on a physical wall with Post-its. That doesn't really matter. So just let that go. Just whatever works for you works. Like I said, it can be something really simple. People like cheese, people can have dairy, milk is available, people like strong flavors. This is if you're trying to sell, for example, a new kind of cheese or a new cheese dish, or you're inventing something like that. And here's a few things that I would like to get into. Start very, very basic. Don't start with your finished world and your finished solution in mind. Start with the really simple basic elements. A lot of times we trip over those. My example is always, we're trying to build a bike shop. Is it legal to ride bikes in that country? Are people able to ride bikes? Do they have bikes? Those kind of basics help us, one, kind of get into the groove of hypotheses, because they're usually quite simple. It might also be very simple to validate those, but they also make sure that we have all the basics covered. By writing down the very basic hypothesis, you can make sure that you, don't overlook those kind of things. So start very, very basic. Next thing, start at the beginning. So how do people actually get there? How do they get started? What are elements in regards to that? So my hypothesis is that everybody already has one of those, or it is that people want one of those, or it's people, like I said, are able to use them, or they are, they want to spend X amount of money on it, or they have basic infrastructure that's necessary to use them, something like that. People have an iPhone, for example. Yes or no, depending on that might change your idea, your concept, your business, whatever you're building with that. I always suggest be a bit careful with your phrasing, not careful, but it helps if you phrase it in one direction. And what I mean with that is when you validate your hypothesis in the next step, and I'm going to get to that in a second, you can kind of use this as a tracking board. So if you phrase all of your hypotheses in a way that if they are true, this is beneficial to your business, then you can kind of, for example, on a Miro board, you can color all of the ones that are validated in green and all of those that are invalidated in red. And then with one quick glance, you can see the progress of your business. So back to the bicycle example, cycling is legal is one way to phrase it. That is helpful because I want to sell bikes. So I'm making that green, for example. If I can phrase the same things like biking is illegal, right? Depending on what I'm trying to verify and what I'm trying to get to. I just recommend this. This helps sorting this out and making this a bit clearer. Also, usually we're trying to get a lot of hypotheses. So for a given project, this might be 100, 150, 200 hypotheses. So that just gives you an idea of an overview and it helps you manage all those hypotheses. The next thing is prioritizing them. And the way that we usually do this is we would, and I'm showing this in a second, we would put them, for example, on a Miro board or on a wall, and then we would basically kind of bubble up the ones that are more critical and that are more relevant to the success of our business. So back to the example, if bicycles are illegal in my region, I don't need to start building anything. This is like super fundamental. Then again, people liking red bikes or people liking green bikes or people liking mountain bikes more than race bikes is also important, but not that critical to our business because we can adjust that. So prioritize and put the more critical ones, the ones that impact your business potentially more, put those up and validate those up obviously first. So this is what something like that might look like. We have multiple areas here. We kind of just put a segment line in here. You could just do anything that you want. No lines, that's just a bit to make things easy. And we've kind of color coded these. Are they validated, invalidated, or we haven't talked about them yet. In their case, they also put labels on it, like what kind of element does this belong to? And then basically they just go through and validate one after the other, basically. Now, we have a collection of hypotheses, things that it's out of our head. We are free to think, we're free to be creative. Now, obviously, we need to validate those. The first thing that I recommend doing is either you do desk research, you can just validate a lot from that, or you go out and you do interviews, observations, those kind of things. So I recommend doing a stakeholder map, and with that, basically just pick out who do I want to ask that hypothesis. So you're combining a stakeholder with a hypothesis for an experiment, basically, or for a research experiment. Then you phrase questions to find more about that topic. So you're kind of building yourself an interview guide. In that, obviously, you're trying to use open-ended questions and the 80-20 rule. So you're trying to let your interview partner talk 80% of the time, you ideally just 20% of the time or less. So build questions about, can you guide me through, why are you doing this? What impact does this have? Those kind of things. And from that, you deduct if your hypothesis is valid or invalid. I don't recommend specifically asking, like, how about this? You can on certain hypotheses. Some you might have to kind of read between the lines, especially if it's more on an emotional or social level. Also interesting is, when do you consider a hypothesis validated? I would say, depending on the hypothesis and the severity of the impact on your project, maybe 3, 5, 7 feedbacks that kind of validate and give you a direction. Yes, this is true or not. It can be one, right? You can just find really quick, again, is it legal? Yes or no? There's a government site, done. But for more in-depth kind of things, like how do people feel about a certain thing, you might want to talk to more people just to get a bit more feedback. The interesting and the good thing about this is, when you go through this process, is out of those conversations, out of those interviews, you will get new hypotheses that you can then put back on your either wall, Miro board, or your list. And ideally, you also get new stakeholders from the interviews. You can just basically ask like, who else should I talk to? And from that, you basically keep going and you repeat. And then you're basically moving in circles between your hypotheses, your stakeholder map, possibly updating your questionnaire, and your feedback that you're getting in the shape of facts and numbers, jobs to be done, pains and gains. So what is it the client or the person wants to get done on a functional level, on a social level, on an emotional level? What kind of pains do they have using this or when trying to solve that? And what would be nice to have? What would they like? Those are the gains. And from there, you can then go into your synthesis and your ideation when you have clustered that and you have your jobs to be done, you have your pains, etc. The nice thing about it, and what are we trying to do with, or what are we achieving with this, is we are identifying real problems, not something that we came up with, but that comes from our end user directly. We reduce the risk and the resources we wasted, because we're really just solving and building solutions and coding and building campaigns and whatever for the problems that are real. We are training a learning mindset. So we are getting used to not thinking of things as absolute and real. It might be, but we need to find out, right? We don't know. And also it keeps the team safe, because if you're moving through a project, if you can always base your solution and your recommendations on actual user insight, you as a team are basically not liable for the result. You can suggest and you can refer to as like, we found out and 12 users said this would be a good idea, but it's not like you personally came up with the idea. You are being led by evidence, and therefore you're not personally liable, which can be good for, depending on the company culture and the client, to kind of keep the team out of harm's way a bit. And always remember, when you assume,